Okay. Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Peter Heinrich, and I'm a developer evangelist at Amazon.com. Today we'll be talking about A/B testing on iOS, which is a free service that Amazon offers to allow you to optimize your apps by evaluating customer response to controlled experiments that you include in your code. And we obtain results based on events that you register and submit to the service over time. So I'll be talking about how to submit those events, how to initialize the service, and how to limit the impact of your tests to certain user segments. Go ahead and feel free to submit any questions during the course of the presentation. We'll be taking them to the end and answering them all at once. And also, please shout out any audio issues that you may encounter, and don't forget to take the survey at the end of the presentation. So let's kick off with a simple explanation of what exactly this service is. What is A/B testing really for? Well, it lets you easily optimize your apps by distributing tests to just a portion of your customers, and then you can observe the success of each test. Based on that, you can choose to roll out a particular variation to a specific set of users or everyone all at once, and this is all without having to republish your app. So that means that you can actually run these tests, adjust the behavior of your application while it's live in the wild, and then launch the winning variation to everyone without having to resubmit your app to any particular storefront. This includes iTunes or the Amazon App Store, Google Play, anything like that. So there are some great benefits to using this service through Amazon. Number one, it's free to use. It's very easy to integrate. It's precise in that it gives you simple and granular control using a simple web-based interface. It has painless deployment, and it's built on Amazon Web Services, so we handle all the scaling for you. So a real-world example may help illustrate exactly why you would use A/B testing in your mobile application. Suppose you've created an app that offers items for purchase in the application. Well, there may be ways to optimize conversion, that is, help more users follow through with a purchase, that aren't necessarily obvious. And the reason they may not be obvious is because it's hard to gauge the effects of changes you make to, for instance, the user layout or the words that you use to describe the purchase process. For instance, should you put a Buy Now button at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen? It's really hard to tell. Well, with A/B testing, you can try both ways and evaluate. I mean, running a test is actually very straightforward. There are actually many ways to design such a test, but it might be helpful to look at the more basic approach first. This is a very common approach used in mobile app development, and it essentially boils down to publishing your app like you normally would. Then you measure how many purchases are made, generally across the entire population of your user base. And this is with the Buy Now button in the default position, let's say at the top of the screen. Then you would change your application, move the Buy Now button to a new location, and republish the updated version. Once again, you'd go through this measurement process. You'd see how many purchases were made across all your population, and then you would compare which version of your app sold more. That's obviously the one that you want live. Well, if it happens to be the first version, you're going to have to roll back the change you just made and republish your app yet again. So you've now published your app 3 times just to determine whether it makes more sense to put the Buy button at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. So clearly there's some significant disadvantages to this approach. First of all, any app update that you make could have a significant negative impact affecting all of your customers. So you may roll out a mistake, for instance, and change the experience in a bad way for everyone. Measurements for each version may be affected by simple differences in timing, and it could also take a long time to gather those measurements across your entire user base. Of course, on top of this, you're going to have to republish your app many times. Okay, so in the face of these issues, let's look at how to approach this using an A/B test. Specifically, we'll look at Amazon's A/B testing service on iOS. So in this case, we add a step up front. We integrate Amazon's A/B testing service, which includes defining an experiment using our developer portal on the web. You publish as usual, and then based on the experiment we defined, the A/B testing service will automatically divide your users into two groups at random and present a different variation to each group. One will see the buy button at the top of the screen, one will see the buy button at the bottom of the screen simultaneously. The A/B testing service will handle all the collection of the data, the measurement, and then also determining with statistical confidence which variation is most effective at generating sales. And the best part is the A/B testing service will allow you to release that best winning variation to everyone with a simple click of a button, and you won't have to republish, so there are no code changes required. So there are some significant advantages to this approach. First of all, you can limit the test to a fraction of your entire user base. So again, you're limiting the potential negative impact. Differences in timing basically cancel out since the variations are presented simultaneously, although they're presented to two different groups. The confidence intervals are calculated continuously, and measurement proceeds automatically until statistical significance is reached. And of course, changes and fine-tuning are possible without the code changes requiring resubmission. So this is all made possible because the A/B testing service analyzes two different types of events. It analyzes views and conversions, and you define for your app what constitutes each kind of event. You just need to inform the A/B testing service when they happen in the code. So as more and more events are recorded, it becomes less likely that differences in your user's gender or age or location or etc. actually account for the changes in effectiveness between the variations. So we saw the basic advantages of A/B testing over the typical testing methodology. There are also some specific benefits of using Amazon's version, Amazon's A/B testing service. First of all, as I mentioned, it's completely free. It has painless deployment, so the server-side logic allows you to quickly iterate tests and deploy new, improved experiences to customers without having to resubmit your application or write any additional client-side code. It has very simple integration, and in fact, many developers report that the Amazon A/B testing Insights SDK can be integrated and ready for release in less than a day, sometimes in as little as an hour. It supports scaling effortlessly because the A/B testing service is built on Amazon Web Services, so you can focus on building great games and apps instead of architecting the scalable back-end services, which we do for you. It gives you precise control, so you can set up experiments and monitor results from anywhere using our web-based developer portal. And actually a new feature is we added recently A/B end testing, which lets you optimize your app or game more quickly by testing up to 5 different variations at once. So, as I mentioned, you will use the Amazon developer portal to configure your experiment, but you don't have to publish your application there. The A/B testing service handles offline situations gracefully in that it will default to a hard-coded variation if a device cannot obtain a connection to the service. It'll also fall back to the most recent A/B variation received depending on the situation. So if it was able to make a connection in the past, then it will use the previous variation. And then it will batch all the data until the device can actually connect to the back-end service. Okay, so before you can actually begin using the service, you need to set up your environment. This means getting the development tools you need, downloading the Amazon Insights SDK and adding it to your project, creating an account and logging into Amazon's developer portal, and registering an app identifier there to represent your project to the service. To use A/B testing on iOS, you need the standard iOS developer tools available from Apple, which includes Xcode. You'll also need an iOS device or emulator, and this will support iPhone 3GS and above, iPod Touch 3rd generation and above, and the original iPad and above. With your dev tools in place, you can download the Amazon mobile app SDK, which includes A/B testing, at developer.amazon.com/sdk.html. That URL is at the bottom of the screen. And then the Amazon A/B testing service is actually part of the Amazon Insights framework, which implements the testing on the client. So you'll need to add it to the linked frameworks and libraries section of the summary tab on your project settings. You'll also want to include the system configuration framework, the core telephony framework, and the libz dynamic lib. So these are all part of the default frameworks and libs that are available with Xcode. Next, you'll need to create an account on Amazon's Dev Portal if you don't have one. If you don't, it's actually super easy to create, especially if you already have a regular Amazon account already. Simply go to developer.amazon.com/home.html and you can get set up in moments. Once you have an account and can log in, then you'll want to navigate to the A/B testing console, and you do that by clicking on the Apps and Services section of the dashboard, then click A/B testing. And here you'll be able to create an app identifier. The identifier ties together all the data submissions from your app on the client devices, and it connects them to the test results that we'll be collating and reporting on for you. Valid app identifiers can include upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and some certain simple punctuation like periods and underscores, that kind of thing. So once your app identifier has been created, you're ready to start experimenting with A/B tests in your app. So these tests or experiments are associated with A/B test projects, each of which can have one experiment only active at a time. However, more than one test project can be active for your app, so that means that it is possible to run multiple experiments in parallel. To create an A/B test project, simply click the Add New Project from the A/B testing console, making sure to select the appropriate app identifier in the upper left. There's a little drop down there above the tabs. So the only data that you need to supply really is the project name, although we highly recommend you also include a description, and then simply click Save Project. So the project has been added, but as you can see, it contains no experiments yet, so we'll go ahead and click the Add a New A/B Test button. So how you set up the A/B test experiment on the portal defines how you'll interact with it from your code. So here's where you would describe how the A/B testing service will know when a customer is experiencing or viewing a test, and then when they subsequently convert or complete some desired action. This might be the difference between seeing an in-app item for sale and clicking the purchase button, for instance. Seeing the item and having it presented on the screen is viewing the test. Clicking the buy button is the conversion step. And you do this by specifying string values corresponding to these view and conversion events. And then when these events occur in your app, you'll notify the A/B testing service by passing along the appropriate string value. And note that these values are completely mutable, so you can easily change them later on. In this case, we've got level 1 complete as the view event and level 1 user bot upgrade as the conversion event. So each A/B test can consist of up to 5 different variations, each representing a completely different customer experience. These include a default condition called the control, plus up to 4 variations. So every user of your app is randomly assigned a variation for each test based on percentages that you specify here. So for example, you might limit an experiment's impact by allocating 95% of users to variation A, the standard control version, and only 5% to variation B. You should note that the sample size here actually directly affects the time it takes to reach the statistical significance, so you should consider this carefully if your app has a small user base, in which case you'll likely want to evenly distribute the customers across the variations, as we did in this case. So the variables you define configure each experiment, and you indicate different values that differ by variation. So your app uses the Amazon Insights API on the client device to retrieve these variables whose values will depend on the variation associated with the current user. You change the behavior of your app based on these variables. And you can add one or more of these variables at any time. Right. It's also possible to refine your target audience for an entire experiment. So regardless of how many people are assigned to a particular variation, you may choose to exclude a large portion of users based on some precondition. So the segmentation feature allows you to restrict participation to a specific set of users, such as a group of developers, beta testers, or maybe a particular group of customers that maybe purchased something in the last week or have gone to your website, something that you can determine for each user in the client code. The default configuration, target all users, will obviously distribute the test to everyone, but you can add special conditions to qualify the subset of users that you want to see the test. So in your app, you add dimensions to the Insights user profile object appropriate to the current user. These dimensions will be passed back to the A/B testing service whenever your code retrieves variation information. So it allows the service to determine if the current user should be excluded from the test. So there are several conditions that you can attach to this in order to filter users. The equals dimension type allows you to specify a value, either a number or a string, that the user profile dimension must equal to be included in the segment. So for example, in your app or game, you might assign a user profile dimension called isUserDebug, and then you use the equals dimension on the web portal to create a segment for all users where that isUserDebug equals true. So that test would only ever be applied to users that you've identified as debug users. The set dimension allows you to choose either is in the set or is not in the set and specify a value, again a number or string, to evaluate against. So is in the set can act as a whitelist, whereas is not in the set can act as a blacklist. For example, you might choose to blacklist development accounts to avoid influencing A/B tests with their activity. You can have up to 10 entries in this type, and if you want more than 10, you can get around that by simply creating a second dimension with 10 more, and so on. With the range dimension type, you can specify a numeric range. Each user whose dimension value is within that range becomes part of the segment, and by default, the range is totally inclusive, from negative to positive infinity. You can add a minimum and or a maximum, and for each you can specify whether the value is included in the interval or not. So it's either an open or closed interval on either end. Here's an example of a complex segment filter based on 4 different dimensions. Now, if any of these dimensions are missing from the user profile or the values don't satisfy the criteria we've established here on the dev portal, then that user will be excluded from the segment, and they'll receive the control variation. So in order to actually send messages back to the service, we need to initialize the client component of the A/B testing service and SDK. You'll note that there are a couple of keys that we pass in that first method call. I'm substituting in some generic labels now, your app key and your private key, and these are associated with the app identifier you registered earlier. And the way you obtain that is you go back to the A/B testing console on the developer portal. Again, that's the apps and settings section, and then A/B testing. And then simply select the appropriate app ID in the upper left and click View Private Keys. And they'll be displayed on this little pop-up. They're obviously grayed out here for security reasons. I don't think anybody's going to steal my keys, but if you were to try, you wouldn't be able to. So after your app has initialized a service, it can go ahead and retrieve the correct variation of an experiment for the current user whenever it's convenient. So you would use the A/B test project name to refer to the set of variations that you want to select from. You can see where we're calling variations by project name, and we're passing level 1 revenue, which corresponds to the project name that we set up earlier on the dev portal. And then on success, you can use the resulting value to retrieve the correct variation for the experiment. That means that you can actually retrieve all the variables that are associated with the corresponding variation. Now, of course, we're going to want to send some information back to the service in order to do the testing and analysis. The first step is to record the view event. Looking at a network error. Okay, record the view event. And again, this view event indicates to the A/B testing service that the customer has actually entered the test. This little code snippet here at the top shows how to create the event and record the event to the Amazon service. And then again, you want to confirm that the name of the event specified in the create method is the same as the view event name specified in the A/B test configuration. It's kind of small, it might be hard to read, but you can see that it's level 1 complete is the event type, and that's also the name that we specified when we set up the test. The next step is to record the corresponding conversion event, and this again indicates to the A/B testing service that the customer has completed the desired action, the conversion. In this case, we're using level 1 user bot upgrade, which again corresponds to the name of that event that we specified in the setup. Using segments does not add that much more complexity. So, say for example you wanted to create a segment that was based on the user ID in order to refine your test population. When your app runs, it simply sets a corresponding user ID dimension on the user profile object based on the current user. We recommend assigning dimensions before actually initializing the Insights SDK, but that's really just for simplicity and to make it a little clear in the code. You can actually do this anytime. You can change them anywhere in the app. Then when the Insights SDK requests a variation for an A/B test, it will pass the current values of all the assigned dimensions for that user. And as I mentioned, only the users whose dimensions pass all segment filters will be included in the A/B test. Now, once a user has been allocated an A/B test variation, this is important, they will maintain that variation even if the values of those dimensions change, assuming the user doesn't clear their app data. So, for example, if today you have a user with an ID of 15 and they receive a variation targeting users with IDs between 1 and 100, even if their ID changes later and it becomes 3,000, tomorrow they will still maintain the variation they received to begin with. However, new experiments that you start after this change will pick up the new value. And this is basically just to maintain some kind of consistency for the user. Just because their values change, they may change quite frequently, you don't want their entire user experience to differ between one run and the next. So once you've saved the A/B test and you've integrated into your app with the code snippets, then you can go ahead and start the test so that variations will be allocated to users. And you do this simply by clicking the Start button in the Draft Experiments view for your project. And as I mentioned, it's important to note that only one A/B test can be active for any one project. Once the A/B test has begun, you can change the variation distribution, but you can't change the variable values. So changing the variation distribution impacts future variation allocations. It doesn't affect any of the current users that are already part of the test. Once the test is active, devices that are running your app can receive variations and report on the results. And you can view the results by clicking the name of your active experiment and then selecting the Report tab. This results page shows conversions versus views, which is the number of conversion events and view events received by the service since the test was started. The view events indicate the customer has begun a test. Conversion indicates the customer has completed the desired action, as we described. It also will show you the conversion rate, which equals the conversions divided by views, and the calculated confidence interval here with a plus or minus indicator is displayed next to the conversion rate. This view also shows you the change, which is the overall difference, either an increase or decrease, in each test item's conversion rate relative to the control, or variation A. It's up to you to determine if a positive or negative change is desired for a particular test. So for instance, you may want to see a positive improvement in conversion events for sales. You may want to see a negative change, or a negative delta. You may consider that an improvement if you're talking about people who file complaints, for instance. And then finally, this view also indicates the confidence, which shows the likelihood that the conversion rate between each test item and variation A is actually statistically significant. And a result equal to or greater than 95% is considered definitive. So on the Report tab here of the A/B test, you can also end the test. And you do that by clicking any of those buttons in the far right-hand column, Keep Variation A, or clicking Use Variation X. Keep Variation A stops the current A/B tests and sets up a launch with a distribution set to 100% for this variation. Once you select the launch, all existing and new customers will receive this variation. Clicking the Use Variation X, where that's A, B, C, D, etc., stops the current A/B tests and sets up a launch with the distribution set to 100% for that variation. So once that launch starts, all current and future customers will receive that one instead. In this example, the developer looks like they selected Use Variation C, and you'll receive a little notification message at the bottom explaining that a new draft launch will be created from this variation, and the launch won't take effect until you start it in the subsequent step. If you confirm selection of the winning variation, then this draft launch is created. And again, it doesn't actually start until you click the Start button and end the A/B test, releasing this new variation to all customers. Because activating the launch will end the test, you'll also receive a confirmation message to prevent accidental activation. So let's look at some of the common issues that you may run into. First, it's important to note that all the debugging messages that we log under the Amazon Insights SDK, so it makes it easy to filter the output. And then the primary thing that you want to look for if you encounter difficulties is that you want to make sure that the project name, the custom event for counting the views, the custom event for counting conversions, and all the variation variable names entered on the developer portal match the values you actually use in your code. If a variable name doesn't exist, if you supply one to the service and it doesn't recognize it, then the SDK will use the default value. And you'll see a little note about this in the warning logs. Also, if the variable that's returned from the variation can't be cast to the type that you want, then the SDK will use the default value. And again, you'll see a warning about this in the logs as well. Finally, let me leave you with some helpful resources. If you have any difficulties or you just want more information, please feel free to follow us on social media. You can also check out our blog, where we have lots of great documentation and additional insight into the use of the service. And you can also get help from Amazon folks and community members on our forums. Okay, that's the presentation for now. I'm going to take a 10-second break and we'll regroup and start answering some questions for you. Be right back. Okay, thanks for sticking with me. So we got a couple questions here. The first one, let's see. So you said this runs on AWS. What services does it use there, and how is it that they're free? Okay, I understand the confusion. Amazon actually runs the server component, which is the web portal, all the data collection, the analysis, reporting, that kind of thing, on our AWS backend. But you don't have to do anything at that level. So Amazon's A/B testing is simply a web service call from your point of view, and those calls are completely free. Actually, they're completely free regardless of the usage, so no matter how many events that you submit, it will always be free to use. Let's see, is the Amazon Dev Portal for iOS apps? Okay, I think I understand the confusion. So the Dev Portal, the Amazon Dev Portal, is used to connect the services from the Amazon mobile app SDK with apps that want to use them, including apps on iOS, apps on Android, and Fire OS apps on the Kindle Fire. So while it is used to publish Android apps to the Amazon App Store, the Amazon A/B testing service doesn't actually require you to have an Android version or a Kindle version of your app, or to distribute it through Amazon. So you're free to use the Amazon's A/B testing service regardless of any kind of Android offering that you may have. Let's see. How long after variable changes to variations? Oh, I see. So I think I get the gist of this question. How long do I have to wait before changes to variables are posted to the users? So changes take place in near real time, so there's typically little or no delay. You go ahead and make the change to a variable in your web portal in the configuration screen, and you should be able to see the change immediately on the device. Let's see. Seems like I'll have to republish anyway if I want to add a new test or different logic to my app. Yes and no. So we recommend looking at A/B testing early and structuring your code to take advantage of it. So this essentially is like parameterizing your features or your user interface so you can fine-tune them through variables later on. And the A/B testing service gives you tons of flexibility in how you can change those experimental variables on the fly. So a little bit of planning up front means that your app's behavior can be modified drastically with just a few clicks on the dev portal. It does require some discipline because you need to make sure that you actually include hooks to use those variables where you might want to test different variations in your code. So that's why we recommend, thinking of A/B testing up front, and don't think of it as an afterthought, which I think is common in other venues, especially in web development, where you make a release and you spend time retrofitting the code with tests after the fact to improve some specific behavior. Because of the additional step in publishing mobile applications, especially when you're publishing through multiple storefronts, so through iTunes and Google Play and Amazon, it's just so much simpler to plan ahead a little bit and build these knobs into your application up front so that you can make the changes, tweak the apps on the fly in the wild, and not have to subject yourself to yet another submission round. Okay, well that's what I've got for now. We'll stay on the line for a little bit longer to take additional questions, and then we'll also publish something on our blog probably in the next week or so with a recap of this presentation and the questions that we received. I also want to mention that we'll be doing another webinar next February 19th on how to integrate Amazon device messaging. And this is a service that allows you to integrate direct messaging directly to devices and maximize your engagement. Thanks very much for joining, and we will see you in February.